I'm from Facebook and Camille works at Graphica. There's quite a few social media platforms listed here, and I think this talk's been great. Everyone's been great thus far as like citing other people who are working in a similar space, and there's really no exception to this. There's a lot of work to be done in this space, a lot that crosses platforms, and really want to recognize that we have some really crucial partners here. Not only our social media partners, obviously Graphica, DFR Lab has done a lot too, and we're going to talk a little bit about Citizen Lab and some of the collaboration we've done with Twitter as well. So.
And FireEye's work too.
And FireEye as well, who's here. So.
To take a step back, I think we wanted to talk about Iran a bit and to portray it perhaps as a misunderstood threat actor as far as it comes to the IO space. And specifically, we wanted together to highlight three things. Iran as a threat actor in IO has been at it for longer than what is generally assumed, and we'll cover that. Has been more persistent than generally assumed, and I think has created overall a lot more volume for these operations than generally reported. So this is what we're going to dig into. They did give us a clicker.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Great. And I think we can start this thinking by looking back at Iran not as a threat actor in IO, but generally just their cyber espionage operations and the trails that they have left and what they have taught us about the specific actor. And here we see a lot of work from different sources. Here we have an ISAT report, a CISCA report, and a Dell SecureWorks report that talk about how social media and fake profiles were used in support of operation whose main objective was the dissemination of malware or was phishing campaigns. Here we have a series of complex LinkedIn profiles with main personas, supporting personas, and we have an actual fake news website. By that I mean a news organization that doesn't exist that has a website with a lot of supporting characters and fake personas with the end goal of that operation being the dissemination of malware.
And just want to highlight here that this was taken from an early report from iSight that was published in 2014, particularly about the creation of these profiles as far back as 2011. And in the fact that these profiles, what made them really strong and really, I guess, successful is the fact that it was these profiles on LinkedIn versus the news site really all supported kind of the same narrative. And that when you were able to convince someone that you really knew them, then you were able to convince someone that they should accept your email, on and on, it really escalated. So I want to bring that back, that while a lot of this seems kind of random, a lot of people in this room can also support the fact that like knowing your target, knowing who you want your victims to be can be incredibly powerful in the effect you're trying to achieve.
And so, of course, we're coming at it because these premium on social engineering is also something that we're going to see when this threat actor slowly moves from the cyber espionage space into what seemed to be more pure IO campaign.
And with some of these that you can see, this Bernie Kratz piece was interesting. We saw a lot of these come up that were actually modified. So we saw the Iranians start with one thing and then change their theme or change their name or change their iconography. And that was something that's also pretty common in espionage campaigns. We see profiles change and people adapt. So the Elect Bernie Kratz Instagram account you see behind me actually originally was called Liberty Front Press, had really random iconography, has now changed to something really specific. And also, I know this is probably kind of a different view. If you look on the far left, that's actually something you can see in our Pages transparency tools, that the Iranians were actually changing the name of the page and previously what it had looked like. So they continued to update it and change it to captivate a new audience, get more likes, more followers, et cetera.
And so when we put all of this in context, we thought about like overall, what does the history of Iranian information operation look like to us? And we divided it in three periods. The first one stretches from 2010, which is also the first social media activity that's focused on US audiences with the creation of the fake Barack Obama Twitter account, and then stretches up all the way up today. So that first period, 2010-2015, is what we really call the beginnings. And here what we're seeing is multiple social media assets ramping up across platforms with quite a global focus and frankly minimum disruptions. Why minimum disruptions is also because at that stage you do have disruptions that come from cyber espionage research that lead to the takedown of these social media assets, but no one's particularly out there looking for IO campaigns. Next period is the acceleration. And here between 2016 and 2019, there's a lot of activity that ramps up in that period, and the US focus is also ramping up. You have seemingly unrelated operations that start to appear, but those operations that unfold in that moment no longer seem related to the dissemination of malware or to the enhancement of phishing campaigns. It's kind of where, you know, the more pure IO, whatever this means, campaigns start appearing. That leads us to the next period, which is where we are now, which is the Iranian IO disruption period over the last year, 2018 up until now, with fantastic work done by a lot of players, and again, including the FireEye reports on this front, where detection catches up and multiple disruptions happen across platforms. And it's waves and waves and waves of disruption across platform, with this idea that, you know, it's almost to the point of volume, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. We're never done catching up with the actors' volume in that space. So, Maddie, if you can tell us a little bit from like your perspective as someone who's working on this from the platform of what it looks like in this transition from the age of acceleration to disruptions of IO campaigns.
Right, so going back from what was really the transition between phase 2 to phase 3 here was really that some researchers, a couple of here, worked on an operation called Endless Mayfly, which originally focused on, again, a traditional cyber espionage campaign that sent malware using various news sites in order to convince people to click on these links and download, et cetera, typical kill chain that you see. And what we found is that actually there was a transition that we saw. These same actors who had traditionally been sending malware were also operating pages that seemingly also focused on a news site type theme, but had absolutely no origination or any type of indication that they were actually dispersing malware. So it was really an interesting shift to see these same actors who were previously trying to lead people and trying to gain information about their targets were now seemingly running what appeared to be like a larger news organization. And at the time, this really was a big preview into what Iranian IO really encompasses, and the fact that while you initially kind of scratch the surface and aren't really sure what to make of it, what we found is that this whole organization, which we're going to talk about later, was very persistent in the sense that it was focused on many different regions, different languages, had been operating for a long period of time. Ergo, we had stumbled across something that was really very sophisticated in the sense that while it was targeted, it also was quite prolific.
And just to re-emphasize this, the malware that's related to Endless Mayfly has nothing to do whatsoever with neither the focus or the content of the IUVM campaign, with on one hand something that's targeting Android devices and Windows devices, and on the other hand something that's really acting as its own sort of media-focused, audience-focused information operation. And when we start looking into these information operations that, you know, are of the IUVM generation,
I know, the notebook's great, right, guys? I know. A few chuckles.
We see like the great diversity of it. You know, we have here a little bit of the sample from the campaigns that are focused on Western audiences, kind of like the wacky content.
Yeah, the original content that they created, yeah.
Anything you want to like highlight on those?
More just in the sense that while these tend to gain a lot of attention for having wacky like US and Western focused content, their content isn't just focused on the US or just focused on one specific region. The content and the languages that they use and in the ways that they target their information operations affect people all over the globe, as opposed to simply just one piece or one audience.
So the map is the global footprint of one of these operations, and so there are audiences who engage with the content that's related to these operations here, on specifically with the domains. And again, you can see the large geographic distribution of the audiences that were targeted. It's almost like, you know, a bit unfocused. It's like a spaghetti approach, a lot of different wacky content, a lot of different audience targeted. We're going to come to a little bit about how that's different from others in that space.
So this is also something we wanted to highlight. A lot of people have downplayed Iranian IO in the sense that, like, well, this is really obvious. Like, can't people tell that this is not necessarily Americans who originated this, or Asians, or people from different parts of the world? So I wanted to highlight that it seems they have been very consistent from what we have found thus far, that when they're running IO campaigns, they don't prioritize being OPSEC savvy in the sense of necessarily using advanced ops to like hide where they're originally from. If you can see in the first picture, the Bertundia page, I think it's pretty clear on the big screen, but, or it's a little blurry, but this is part of, again, one of our pages transparency tools that actually lets you look at like the assessed geolocation of the administrators running this page. And in this case, 4 of the admins had actually geolocated out of Iran. Also, in the center picture, you can see that there's some cross-posting of the same content, considering that like it originated from a press TV news outlet page, which is owned by the Iranian government, and literally the exact same content was copied to a website that is called aftruth.com. Again, a few Google searches, maybe you're just one step away from an Iranian actor. It doesn't really seem that advanced. And then the use of the BBC iconography in the Instagram account that's noted, even though the name of the Instagram account clearly isn't an authentic BBC page, clearly it's not somebody with a blue check mark, it still has an impact, and they're still using a lot of these familiar iconography, messaging, et cetera, with the assumption that I think that a lot of this is just still effective and continuously prioritizing the volume over necessarily being OPSEC savvy.
Yeah, the BBC thing is really weird because it's also not the first threat actor that we've seen impersonate the BBC in an operation, which I wonder what is the effectiveness of it. We detected, and you guys took down, the Bangladeshi government doing the exact same thing about 1.5 years ago. So I don't know why people like impersonating the BBC in their IO. Markers of persistence. Talking a little bit about the volume behind these operations.
Sure, and a big point is that the volume is not just central to one platform that we found with the Iranians. We've seen them all across YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, and obviously all different types of Facebook assets. They clearly are trying to use consistency in their messaging with using, as you see in the bottom center photo, they use a website on 2 completely different Facebook pages with the same iconography, same website, with the sense of, if one doesn't work, let's try this again. If one gets taken down, let's just redo the same thing again. You can also see the Twitter accounts in the right-hand corner. They're all considered technically Liberty Front Press. They use the same iconography and very similar Twitter handles, but use different languages. So you have Liberty Front Press Venezuela, Liberty Front Press US, and this also really helps to the narrative of painting you as legitimate news organization, which is the same issue that we ran into before when I was talking about IUVM. On the last picture there, where it just looks like 2 websites, let me go back real quick. It focuses on just, again, kind of what we showed earlier with Press TV, but they had written basically like made up or pieced together news articles and reposted them across multiple websites that they were running. And while we can't action people and we can't necessarily detect this based on just content sharing, again, it just speaks to their level of commitment to consistent narratives, consistent imagery that they plan to push at massive volume. And then really what also we have found interesting with multiple takedowns is that they're not limited to one TTP, one social media platform, or one way of using the social media platform. Every different way that they can connect to users, they're trying to facilitate their operations. So as you see in the top 2 memes that are really pretty popular, they weren't just limited to like their own content. They're clearly very comfortable taking content that fits their narrative and reposting that, again, to avoid detection maybe, or also I think just to gain audience because people are familiar with these images. At the bottom, we've seen them post a lot of outside links to off-platform websites. Ergo, if you continue to post these links around and get people to leave the platform, it again makes them think about the content that they're consuming differently. And we've also seen them use Instagram in a number of ways. While you see here that this is just a plain Instagram account that seems to just have is relying on just basically an image and a small caption, we've seen them try to use hashtags, try to link, try to tag one another. But also with this methodology, I think they're testing here of how much can they build an audience. And then it also limits how you can detect these type of things. Because how do I detect it's just an Instagram account with followers, with all of these, how the platform is meant to be used, and ergo, not leaving super connecting signatures around. So I think that they're just not limiting themselves to one way to reach an audience. And in studying all of these, it's taken me to kind of an interesting place.
Just last point on the domain thing, the fact that they're so domain heavy in their use of I/O is both an opportunity for OSINT research, because this is a lot of what's been used to reconstitute that set, but also frankly a challenge for enforcement, and shows the dedication to really running cross-platform campaigns. About those cross-platform campaigns,
this is where it's led me. It's just being scooped by Mick, so thanks for that. Look forward to this day. But really, we had designed like a big overarching chart about how to connect these things, and we found that after hours of all this work and trying to get in all of the granular detail, we realized this actually communicated the point perfectly. In the sense that the more we continue to uncover these operations and the more that we learn about them, the more that we find that they're actually linked together in surprising ways, and that it doesn't seem as discombobulated, despite the fact that it's different methods, despite the fact that it's all over. When you start to have these breadcrumbs that take one takedown to the next takedown, one takedown seemingly seems really isolated and seems to focus on a group or focus on a tactic, but it makes it challenging then to wrap your arms around what that is and programmatically detect it and enforce against it. Ergo, this drawing.
Ergo, all these operations who actually seem to live much closer to one another, both by the infrastructure links that Natalie is describing from Facebook, but also by OSINT that starts linking something that happened there with something that happened there. And I think all of that led us to conclude that Iran was probably very different than the threat actors that we often talk about in that space. And so we wanted to conclude on a contrast between the operations that we're familiar with on the Russian side and the ones that we're talking about. It's a lot of text, but we'll try to go through it quickly. I think in terms of attributes, what's been fascinating studying Russian I/O is really their dedication to targeting, infiltrating, dividing, and manipulating existing communities. And that is something that we do not see on the Iranian side, where rather we have a little bit more of a everything's thrown on the wall approach with this very large focus, both in topics, in communities engaged, and also in global focus, right? We see a variation of TTPs, as Maddie noted, on the Iranian side, where we do see characteristic traits emerging on the Russian side, for instance, the hack and leaks campaigns that we haven't seen elsewhere for now. Similarly, I think often Russian I/O tend to be presented as one campaign where really they span different threat actors whose relationships to one another remain unclear. They might well be very different actors who don't coordinate, or perhaps they do. Again, none of this has been, convincingly demonstrated. And it's almost, nice contrast to what seems to be emerging on the other side of the picture with Iranian I/O presented as very disparate campaign, actually displaying a little bit more coherence. Finally, we talked about what's their closest cousin, which is like an odd way to sort of describe where their tradition is anchored. On the Russia side, we have, of course, the history of active measures tradition and the information controls mechanisms and that tradecraft, whereas on the Iranian side, we actually have an I/O tradition that lives so much more closely to its cyber espionage cousin, right? It really grows out of that, so it's quite a different trajectory.
Can I talk about the enforcement?
Yeah.
So we'll finish off with this. I think that it's also something about changing the thinking behind how to handle different information operations by different state actors. We've talked a little bit about, like, in this room about how motives are different and ergo their tactics can be different. In this sense, from what my job is, in the sense of focusing so much on Iranian I/O, that means that we have to dedicate resources to really continued enforcement, not just particularly in detection. Because the more that you find is the more that you have to take down, is the more work for yourself, but also what I'm finding is the more that you discover. And how do we continue to better define, like, what is the best strategy for actually disrupting these types of operations that are so loud and are so global and are so massive, has been a very different strategy than what we have found for actors with higher OPSEC.
The other thing that we started exploring is, and that might be different, is we actually don't know how domestic-focused Iranian I/O relate to their more foreign-focused campaigns. that is a clear picture that we have on Russia, where we very much see the domestic operations being conducted by the very same actors who later conducted the foreign operations. And on the Iranian side, they actually seem to unfold on different platforms. Simin, who's somewhere in this room, has done wonderful work on how Iranian domestic IO unfold on Instagram, and I think that leaves a lot of open questions on how are those connected to those that we've seen that seem to target foreign audiences. That's it.
That's really all we
for
have.
today. That's really
Thank
all
you
we
so
have.
much.